So hey guys, it is Jay Campbell and Nelson Virgil with the Real Truth Men's Health Webcast. Thank you guys for tuning into the show. We're super excited tonight to be joined by Will Brink. Now, for most of you guys who are watching this show, I'm sure you know who Will Brink is. He doesn't really need much of an introduction, but for some of the younger guys who don't know who Will Brink is, Will is actually a Harvard researcher who's written for just about almost every single magazine I think that was ever put out in anti-aging and human performance, muscle bodybuilding. I could go on and on. I mean, he's written for Life Extension, Ironman Magazine, Muscle Media, Muscle Mag. Pretty much any article that's ever been written in any of those fields of endeavor, Will has written an article about it. We're really excited to have him on the show today. We're going to be talking a lot of stuff. He's also heavily involved now in SWAT fitness and also tactical special forces and tactical stuff. So a lot of topics we can go, a lot of different directions we can go today to have Will on the show. So Will, welcome to the show, man. What do you have to tell us?
Well, thanks for having me to begin with. Excited to be here. I think this is this is really the new paradigm that you guys are exploring in terms of us guys who are now getting a little older that have no interest in being frail and weak and having no libido and depressed. We're not having it. And so whether we lead the younger guys in that direction to never get there, or guys that are, should we say over 40, maybe a little more, but I think this is the paradigm that you guys are working towards, of shifting all that whole thing. The get old great, screw the get old gracefully thing. I have no interest in that at all. And so I might have sort of started, like, my bread and butter pre-internet days was, writing for all the muscle mags and stuff. But I think like anybody, once you get past a certain age, and my personal interests these days are more in, preservation of health and mobility and muscle and libido and mood and all that, which definitely have an overlap to the younger guys that just want to get bigger for sure. But like I say, I think the direction you guys are going really is the paradigm shift that we have to get more even women, but let's say men in general to adopt, and kicking and screaming all the way, of course, because they just want to pop a pill or see their doctor or whatever. But I know you guys have the same thing. It's like each guy that comes to you or sends you an email or reads your book or whatever is starting from square one. I feel this way. I'm tired. I'm lethargic. Blah blah blah. Have you had your testosterone levels checked?
Right.
Well, I had a physical. Yeah, but they don't test testosterone levels in physicals. Okay, and it just goes on that's like the conversation almost like every time, and it's not. I'm not saying frustrating. I mean, hey, at least more guys are asking,
right.
and are trying to figure it out. But of course, that's just that's as the frustration just kind of it grows from there, because then you're often fighting, should I say, with the person's own doctor, having to be their sort of be their mouthpiece, to help them out and go back and forth. And, the frustration, I don't know about you guys, but I mean, I've had my own, here, considering what I do for a living, I have had my own frustrations in that area with medical professionals. It's not like I go in there and even my own doctors are just like, hey, sure, Will, what do you want? I got to convince them. I got to cajole them. I got to show them studies. I got to go through a song and dance myself. And maybe someday I'll find the perfect, doc to work with, which honestly is one of the reasons I moved from the Northeast to the ultra-conservative, anti-testosterone, Northeast to Southern Florida, where I can find better people to work with, and I'm hoping to actually start working with some clinics and stuff down here, adding my own information. But yeah, I mean, that's basically the spiel. That's why I'm here, because I like the paradigm that you guys are trying to push.
Well, thanks, Will. We're very honored to have you. I've been reading your stuff for years. I mean, you're definitely a pioneer. Even my 2 books that I wrote, I read a lot of your stuff before I even wrote my book, so I had a little bit more information on nutrition and supplements. You definitely are. As I said, I admire your work. You're brilliant in not only the way you write, but the way you educate men and women on the different, especially in supplementation. And we're talking today, we're going to cover supplements like creatine, whey protein, I want to concentrate because we could talk for hours, as you well know. The three of us could. So this is a 1 hour hangout. We may do maybe another one in the future where we can talk about different other things.
Plus, questions will filter in after this one, and then we can just follow up on questions. That's always works pretty well.
Yeah. So why don't we start with creatine, since it's the most. I think Jay just got off for some reason. Jay, you still here? Okay.
Yeah, I'm still here.
It's the most studied supplement in the sports medicine and sports nutrition world. Why don't we speak first about what creatine has proven to do, the different formulations of creatine, how to take it, should we take it before and after workouts, et cetera, et cetera. So why don't we just give us a summary on creatine or creatine monohydrate and the effects on muscle and strength and even depression and mood and aging.
Yeah, no, that's the interesting thing to me, at least, about creatine is that it's the most studied supplement of all time, and yet so many people, including medical professionals, are still completely unaware that creatine has such a long list of health benefits that I personally would use creatine if I didn't lift weights at all. I recommend, that's one of the few supplements that I personally would take whether I ever lifted a weight or not. And there's so many studies on heart health, cognitive health. It lowers cholesterol. There was just a study that came out that showed it actually prevented fatty liver disease. It goes on. And yet, I find as old news as people say, creatine's old news, I still find that they don't even know the tip of the iceberg of all the benefits, the potential health benefits. There was one study, as you mentioned, depression, where creatine made SSRIs, antidepressants, work in people that had never worked before. They were non-responsive to SSRIs, and adding creatine actually made them work. So it's just piles and piles of data that goes on and on with creatine, and that, to me, like I say, to a lot of people considered old news, and yet they still don't seem to, even if they're perpetuating some of the, not perpetuating, should I say, some of the myths, creatine is bad for your kidneys or some nonsense. They still see it strictly as a performance or, strength building type supplement. And to me, it's probably one of the most effective, anti-aging general health supplements on the market, which is why I also, as I was saying in the intro, as I've gotten older, I've actually been pushing it as a supplement to aging populations and older adults and that type of things. That's kind of like a key point I would make about what are people not getting from the creatine, or what do they not know about creatine they should know. They really should research all the health benefits.
And what is creatine? Tell us. Let's go.
I guess that's a good question. Creatine is sort of considered the universal energy molecule for a cell. The food you eat, ultimately, after a whole bunch of successive steps of being broken down into its simplest component, is basically a high energy molecule. So for you to, your muscles to move, breathe, everything to work, every cell basically has to use ATP. People have heard the word ATP, and creatine basically charges ATP, is what it recharges ATP. So it really is almost not quite, but pretty close to the most basic, energy, universal energy product that we produce, along with NADPH and a few others. But ATP or creatine is probably the best known of them. And different disease states, aging, for example, vegetarians are known to have low tissue creatine levels. Various things can negatively impact your tissue creatine levels. And it's not impossible to get optimal creatine levels from a diet, but you'd have to eat you'd be eating pounds of red meat and herring and stuff like that to get. People would say, well, why don't you just get it from your diet? Which, it's possible, but as always, is it realistic? The answer is probably no. For you to get a couple of grams every day of creatine, which is about minimum 2 to 3 grams a day to really saturate the tissues, you'd have to eat, like I say, an awful lot of really high creatine foods, which is generally found, as you know, in meats, and I think mackerel's really high in it for some reason. Who wants to eat mackerel every day?
Right. So Will, let's cut to the chase on creatine real quick then, because we have so many questions that we can ask, as Nelson said. Best source of creatine and the dosage. And again, I know that there's the loading phase and all the other things that we've heard over the years. But in your opinion right now, for the average person, and then of course the competitive, fitness bodybuilder, physique enthusiast? How do they get it?
Well, that's a good question, because again, people see a lot of companies selling creatine, and they don't know there's only two places in the world that creatine is produced, and that is Germany and China. It used to be produced in Italy and the U.S. and whatever, and basically the Chinese have more or less knocked everybody out. And there's a variety of factories in China that make creatine, ranging from actually very high quality to really garbage. Now, the German stuff, which people know under the source name Creapure, is the stuff I've always recommended. I actually wrote the very first articles in Muscle Mag back in the day when people used to say, well, creatine's creatine. Well, I had a whole bunch of tests run and published that material on Chinese creatine versus German creatine, and showed that the German creatine was far and away the better product. And in fact, when I did it a second time some years later, and I couldn't publish it because I caused so much trouble with the first time that the advertisers complained so much that the Muscle Mag refused to publish my second article on that. So luckily for me, that was just when the net was starting to come online, and I still had a way of getting that info out. But most people, don't know that creatine is just a huge bulk product, creatine monohydrate, and only produced in two places in the whole world. So every time you see a brand name, whatever it may be, they're not making their own creatine, and either they're sourcing it from Germany, which is a little more expensive and what I would personally recommend and use, or it's coming from some big bulk place in China. So I would just tell people, look for the Creapure logo on anything they buy.
Well, and I read one of your articles that you mentioned organic contaminants that were found in different creatine products.
Yeah.
Chinese, you think?
Say it again?
Mostly Chinese origin?
They were Chinese. They were the ones that had the worst testing as far as cyanamide, about 3 or 4 different chemicals, and they were all Chinese. At that time, there was still an American producer, and that was decent, and there was a couple of European producers, and they were okay. Nothing tested as well as the German stuff. The Chinese stuff was far and away. And I will say, to credit the Chinese, that was a while ago, and the Chinese product has definitely improved. That was like a long time ago. But again, it's still hit or miss. It's variable. It depends on which producer is making it. I should have some stock in Creapure. I really should. People have asked me, well, you must be getting paid to say this. I've never had a dime from those people. They really ought to send me a check. You hear that?
For sure.
Yeah. Well, I have another question specifically on my own point of view. I've read a lot of the papers, and I'm not sometimes 100% sure that the muscle gains that they show in the papers is actually muscle, or is it water retention or intracellular water that goes into the cells, and it actually shows up in body composition analysis, not on DEXA obviously, but on the cheaper ones. As muscle is muscle the muscle that grows with obviously exercise and creatine, et cetera, real muscle, or is that water retention?
Well, that's a good question. It's actually both. For a while, when again the early studies came out, people thought it was just intracellular water, which is not bad. But as it turns out, the hydration state of the cell is actually an anabolic signal. Right. So a well-hydrated cell actually, let's just say general, is a healthy cell. It sends out an anabolic signal, and so what happens is the initial growth or the initial weight gain or whatever is intracellular water, and then that actually increases protein synthetic rates and laying down of actual muscle. So it's actually both. One comes before the other, but it's clearly it does lead to an increase in muscle mass and strength over time. But muscle tissue laying down of actual new tissue or what have you takes a while. So your initial experience, that could have weight you gain, that strength you gain, maybe the first couple of weeks is intracellular water. But that basically means it's doing what it's supposed to do. That's the good of it.
So what is your recommended daily dosage protocol?
Most studies at this point pretty much have done away with loading. Right. 3 to 5 grams a day seems to be fine. Yeah. There doesn't appear to be any timing. There was one little study by Antonio that it was pretty small and suggested there may be some benefits to post-workout creatine, but it was, even he would tell you it was small at best, and he didn't really think over time it really would matter. But most people take it post-workout anyway, so why not? There's really no advantage taking it pre-workout, which I do see some people do. And the effect of creatine, of course, is a chronic effect. It's a long-term effect. It's not an acute effect. It's not a stimulant. And what does happen though, if you take, some people at least, you take creatine before a workout, it can upset your stomach. You get that little bit distended kind of thing because it's sitting down there, and creatine is pretty insoluble, so it does. You can sit down there and draw a bunch of water in. So I do see a creatine in a number of pre-workout formulas, which I think is a mistake and I have heard from people that they got stomach issues from it.
And does sugar improve absorption, insulin? What is the relationship there?
That was actually originally looked into to see if it increased. You get a certain percentage of people are non-responders to creatine, and they actually found that by giving them a big bolus of glucose, like 100 grams, we're not talking a small dose here, a pretty whopping dose, it did seem to decrease the number of non-responders. I think the whole glucose blast, with creatine has pretty much fallen out of the wayside. Nobody seems to really bother with it anymore, and I don't really think. I think it's just more a little more time. That was also during the phase where loading phases were popular and all that. Where I think again studies basically suggest that you probably don't need it, and it's not really great for you to take 100 grams of glucose, Celtec type blasts of glucose, especially again you're 22 years old, or whatever, and but again we're talking about I think us guys again, people that keep don't really want to become insulin resistant from and ruin our kidneys and the rest of it.
I think we all know that back then when the loading quote unquote was in vogue, the supplement companies may have been behind that a little bit.
Yeah, at least pushing it for sure. I mean, I don't know if they were behind the conclusion per se, but now again, the only thing I will say is, like I say, for those who don't respond to creatine, it did seem to reduce the non-responder. So if you're a non-responder, that might do the trick.
Right.
But I'm not sure. Again, my feeling has always been, well, is it really worth it? I don't know if you guys back in the day, if you ever tried 100 grams of glucose, but that is disgusting.
Right.
And the low stuff, I could never. My gut is very sensitive. I could not do the 28 grams. Even 5 is sometimes high for me. Let me ask you something else. How do you take it? So you take it just straight with water, or how do you take it?
Well, so that segues nicely into the way I take it. Actually, I take it in my bomb-proof coffee recipe.
Actually, I've also read papers that say that caffeine blocks the effect of creatine.
Yeah, those papers. Here's an interesting thing. How the first studies that showed that creatine had effect, which were done by Greenhoff, how they were all given coffee and tea. So we know the stuff works in coffee and tea because all the early studies showed it worked in coffee and tea. There was a couple of oddball studies that in very high dose caffeine, it appeared to negate the effects of creatine. But again, that doesn't seem to really be the case in normal caffeine intakes, that you and I would get with, a couple strong cups of coffee or something like that. So again, I don't think that seems to hold water. Or coffee.
Wouldn't the high caffeine, though, because of the diuresis of the high caffeine content, be the reason that caffeine or that you wouldn't get the response and creatine?
And that's a good question. It's a good question, a good point. However, again, some pretty big recent studies actually find caffeine or coffee does not actually have a diuretic effect. Yeah, that's another one of those. So that's fairly recent. I don't know, only probably a couple of years old, but in fact, that's another one of those. Doesn't appear to be the case. It might. You just want to go take a pee,
right.
Apparently, just because you just drank a bunch of fluid. Apparently, right. Because they have done some several studies now that actually are not finding coffee to actually have the diuretic effect we thought it did.
Well, the main barrier we're talking about physicians at the beginning or clinicians. The main barrier when they discourage the use of creatine to their patients, and in my world, obviously, I work with a lot of patients that may not be healthy 100% and they're taking medications, is that the loading of the kidneys or the decrease in EGFR. So tell us a little bit about whether or not that effect is real, or it's just the fact that we're taking creatine and obviously our EGFR will go down.
That's a good question that doesn't have as good an answer as I would like. In healthy people with healthy kidneys, it's clearly not. It's non-toxic. It does increase creatinine levels, which, as you know, is a lab indication of kidney dysfunction, but does not cause kidney dysfunction. Yeah. And so, in a small percentage of people, it does increase creatinine. However, when they actually go and do, actual, as you said, GFR tests or more in-depth tests, they do not find any problems with kidney function. You have retrospective studies up to 5 years plus of people taking high doses of creatine without any kidney problems. There's a Dr. Tarnopolsky, I think I'm pronouncing that right, in Canada, who has used very high doses of creatine with little kids with, I think, MS. Is neuromuscular diseases, and again, they've been on high-dose creatine for a long time without any. He gets really bent out of shape when people start bashing creatine because he's finding direct medical uses. So in people with healthy kidneys, it's clearly not an issue. I wouldn't, but how if you have pre-existing kidney issues, I honestly don't know the answer to it, and I don't know if anybody else does. And I would not. You wouldn't want a false positive of kidney problems coming from creatine when you have issues that need to be looked at. So I wish I had a great answer for that, but I don't think it's been studied enough, in people with pre-existing or concurrent kidney issues to give like a definitive answer. Because as you said, some of the people that you're working with are taking nephrotoxic medications that are already straining, or stress on that kidney. I don't really know. I wouldn't want to say something conclusive and be wrong. I think personally, I think creatine has so many values, health values. I think that I would probably take the lowest possible therapeutic dose, around 2-3 grams, and see how see what my tests were doing. As long as they didn't change, and in the GFR and creatinine, I wouldn't sweat it. But that's a non-clinical, non-medical professional personal statement.
You want to switch now to your hot topic of the, what do you call that coffee?
The bomb-proof coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why don't you, real quick, Will? Why don't you set that up in? Let's because this is a really good topic, and we're gonna have a lot of interest in this. Let's set that up from a standpoint of how did you develop it in relation to the big craze, the Dave Asprey craze of bulletproof coffee, and then I'll let you explain from there.
Well, basically, I started to get emails from people, as you'd expect, say, hey, Will, what do you think of this new craze? Putting butter and coconut oil and bulletproof coffee. Can you check into it? So I said, yeah, sure. Let me look into it. I did a video on it, and basically gave it my assessment, which was, basically if you're in a keto diet, you're in a low carb, no carb keto diet, it can fit. It's okay. I think that's a place it could be used. I'm not a huge fan of keto diets personally. But let's just say in that context. But beyond that, the magical claims of magical, grass-fed butter and all the rest of it, that's where I just, So I always try to take a pretty balanced approach. But people said, well, okay, Will, if you were going to make a coffee, you were going to make a coffee recipe that was, good for you and did what the other stuff claims as far as cognitive benefits and was not, let's say, potentially unhealthy for you. We could go back and forth and argue about half a stick of butter and whatever being healthy or whatever. I'm going to leave that a neutral comment. However, so people ask me, I said, okay, that's a good question, right? I'm a coffee guy anyway. I love coffee. So even prior to my bomb-proof, I was a coffee guy. If you guys ever watch my videos, I've always got a cup of coffee in my hand. And people think it's a prop, but it's not. I just love coffee. So I sat down and I thought, okay, what would I put in coffee that makes sense? And obviously, my sort of rules were, it either has to add flavor, taste good, or obviously add no flavor to the coffee and make sense at the dose I can put in it. And so I played with the recipe for a while, and I came up with bomb-proof coffee, which tastes great. It has health benefits. Everything in it, unlike some of the other ones, actually has solid data behind it to support it. I didn't come up with it sitting, in a Tibetan cave somewhere, so on and so forth. So, and I experimented with it, and it tastes great, and it's good for you, and people really dig it, and so I've been sort of just giving away the recipe. People can go to, Brinkzone and just hit bomb-proof coffee in the search box, and it should pop up. And that's sort of how that came.
And just so you guys know, we'll post the links to all this stuff when this is in the rewind, so everyone can go directly to that stuff.
Yeah, but Will, just say the website very slowly. Say the website name.
My website, which is brinkzone.com.
Brink Zone.
Yeah.
And the coffee recipe is called
bomb-proof.
Bomb-proof.
Yes, because I like to say bombs always beat bullets.
Exactly.
Okay. And what does it have? What does it have?
In addition to, of course, good, strong French press coffee, it's got cocoa. Of course, again, chocolate has been found to have a lot of benefits.
Tyramine.
Yeah, exactly. Raw cocoa. It's got tyrosine, which also has some really solid data behind it as far as neurocognitive benefits.
For sure.
Yeah, MIT has actually done some research. NASA's done some research on tyrosine. It also has creatine, as you guys were asking. That's where I put my creatine. And then it has to give it a taste and I think maybe emulsify some of these fat-soluble compounds. I put a little bit of coconut oil and a little bit of skim milk, and I whip it. I use like a frother. And so that gets all the stuff that's in there. A lot of these compounds are fat-soluble, and they're not terribly easy to absorb. Low solubility compounds are generally more difficult. Now, at the very least, it just tastes really good. So whether that doing a little bit of coconut oil on the frothing, I mean, instead of using like cream or whatever, that just really makes it taste good. And I suspect, at least I hope, I think it also may improve absorption a little bit. A lot of times, taking some of those compounds with some fat helps absorption, especially of some of those fat-soluble compounds. So that's it. It's fairly simple, but it tastes great, and you'll feel great.
How about sweetening? I mean, is there any? I like a little sweetening in my coffee. So.
Well, what do you sweeten with?
What?
What do you usually sweeten with? What's your choice of sweetener?
A little brown sugar.
Yeah, it shouldn't bother anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a negative. The only thing I tell people is to get the full effect would be to take it before you eat any protein, because tyrosine, mostly tyrosine. So drink wake up, make your bomb-proof coffee, make your oatmeal or whatever, and then by the time you get to your food, you've kind of drank in your coffee. Right. So tyrosine especially is going to be blocked by some of the other larger amino acids.
Yeah, you want low insulin so it crosses the blood-brain barrier.
So you are going to. So basically, if you're eating oatmeal, like I eat oatmeal with it, so straight up carbs. So yeah, you'd be fine.
Okay.
It's not going to negate anything. I just wouldn't add a lot of minimal amount of milk, because again, the tyrosine, the protein in the milk and stuff there has been some studies there. So again, I just use mostly the little coconut oil, half a teaspoon of coconut oil, and it's a little zap of skim milk, and froth it up, like I say, with a whisker. I do have a whole video how to make it and everything too. So
you tell people where to buy this stuff.
Yeah, I just give brands that I'm using currently, and in the video I show I kind of mix and match my brands. I have a few brands I personally tend to stick to because I trust them.
Like what?
Well, I like Life Extension. I've done work for Life Extension and consulting work for them personally, and they've always been good to go. They don't do a lot of bulk stuff, so sometimes you've got to go to other companies. I like Jarrow. I think Jarrow is generally an excellent company.
Jarrow is amazing.
Yeah, Jarrow's a good company. I've known Sid Jarrow forever.
Yeah.
And I actually know Dr. Kalatra. I've known him forever too. Does a lot of their formulating stuff. He's a really good guy. I'm blanking on the name of the online company that does a lot of bulk. It's in the video. You'll see them. That's where I got my. I think that's where they got the tyrosine from. Okay. There's a handful of companies that I'm always just really hesitant. People always ask, what are your favorite companies? And I'm always really hesitant to do that because you know why. I mean, people get upset, and I do consulting work for other supplement companies and stuff, and I've always gone back and forth between even just making a list of Will Brink's preferred companies or something, but that just opens up a can of worms. So if people ask me, I'll tell them. Otherwise, I don't say anything.
So what is different? I mean, when people drink this stuff like you, I mean, compared to just coffee, straight coffee, what's the difference? Am I going to feel like a Superman?
Well, I definitely, and I and others definitely report even more clarity, better concentration, a little better energy. It's not. I'm actually very sensitive to stimulants. I think I've taken one dose of ephedrine my entire life. I did not like it at all. So I'm pretty sensitive to stimulants. So it's not one of those shaky, like if you're used to taking some killer strong pre-workout, it's not, it won't be for you because some people they're just so jacked up on these stimulants. This is more for people, again, that want that non-jittery, smooth clarity. There's no crash. It doesn't, bother your sleep, at least, taken. So again, it's really formulated more as a health first, neurocognitive, and of course there's just benefits too. Even if you may not feel it, I mean, there's benefits to creatine. There's benefits to the cocoa extract. There's benefits to tyrosine and stuff. So I just noticed a longer, clearer type, mental state, but nothing jittery.
Once a day or more than once a day?
I do. I mean, it's just how much you want. I personally, I just like my one big, strong-ass mug of coffee in the morning. That's me, but with a little refill. But, that's really up to you. I think, they've shown, I mean, there's been a number of studies that find that, within reason, the more coffee you drink, apparently, the better. So, and I don't think any of the other stuff would need to be scaled back, really. Maybe the creatine would just be in your first mug, and then after that, you just use the other stuff because, you'd end up with enough creatine maybe to upset your stomach. But I tend to, like I say, I'm more of a quality than quantity guy. So my cup of coffee is, A, it's really big, and 2, it's strong. My stuff's pretty strong. Strange topic, but it reminds me of when I was a kid. There was an old guy who ran the store, and I came by his store one day, and he had this huge cigar. I mean, like a foot-long cigar. And I said, "What, Tony? What's up with the cigar?" He said, "Well, my doctor told me I need to cut it down to one a day." And that was basically how he solved his problem.
So you want to switch to whey protein? Is that okay? Or before we do so, I really think that what I liked the most, you did a video and an article on how supplements are really made. Can we talk? Because that was very interesting.
And I think that's a better segue from, like, you could have said, well, why do you like those companies? Like I mentioned some companies. Well, why do we like those companies? And the reason I like those companies and some other companies is, supplements. Again, the marketers supplements with their ads and whatever. There's a picture of a lab and a dude in a white coat and all that. To give people this idea there's scientists working there and all that. Well, 98% of the time, none of this is true, and they're just a couple of business guys or dudes who sold juice in the '80s who got out of jail and started a supplement company or whatever.
That's 100% truth.
We could name names there, Jay, but we won't, right? But we don't know.
100% truth.
Name some awfully big names, but anyway. So, none of that is really true, and most of this stuff is some guys make up some formulas, and then they go to a big. Jay's falling off his chair over here.
That's awesome, man. You made me laugh. I'm sorry. Continue.
So basically they come up with a formula, and which may or may not, of course, also be science-based, and they go to a big contract manufacturer, and they have the product made and labeled and bottled and sent back, and that's basically the model. And again, most people don't realize that. And what happens is, now there's nothing inherently wrong with that at all. I mean, some of these contract manufacturers are excellent, GMP certified, ISO certified places. There's nothing at all negative about that per se, but it's really like letting the fox guard the hen house, because if you're not involved in where that stuff's being sourced, if you're not then batch testing, taking a box or a batch and third-party testing the dose and contaminants and whatever, well, you really don't know what's in this stuff, and it's not uncommon. I mean, very few guys who, make a company batch test are really all that involved in the sourcing. They, look what they're looking for. They go to a contract manufacturer and they're looking for the cheapest manufacturer, to come in to bid lowest, and that's most of your supplement company. So, and they say it's not necessarily a negative, but the companies that I tend to be more interested in are ones that I know are very involved in the sourcing. They tend to do third-party testing. I know Life Extension, for example, they're real sticklers on that. If they get back a product that doesn't test up to spec or has higher levels of contaminants or whatever, it'll get kicked back. And if they don't fix it, they'll go to a new they'll go to a new contract manufacturer.
Let me ask you. Let me just put you on the spot, because all of that was really awesome stuff. So how many of the top companies right now, and obviously you're going to give your opinion here, but how many of the top companies are amino spiking right now?
That's a good question. I don't know. I really don't, only because that to really give an informed answer, I would of course have to seen the actual test results of a lot of them, and again I think some of this is not actually. This is going to come back to them being involved in their own stuff. I think a good percentage of them are unaware that they were amino spiking. I think the contract manufacturer, to save money, does that and then sends their own internal testing saying, see, we're making the product you're paying for. I wouldn't be surprised at all if that didn't come as big a surprise to some of the sellers who own these companies as it did to the buyer, because again, they're not really often that involved in their own product. They have outsourced a product, and the contract manufacturer or the source or even the person making the raw ingredients, a lot of coming out of China, just as they often find Viagra in some of the penis pills. They find diuretics in some of the weight loss pills and stuff. A lot of the times, it's not the retailer or the end maker who actually is doing this or knows about it. Sometimes it is. I mean, again, it's always a mix and match. But sometimes I honestly don't think they even know. That you got some Chinese company that says, if we put a little Viagra in this, these guys are going to buy more of this and they're going to sell more of it. And we're going to sell more of it, and around and around you go. So.
Well, one other thing, let me throw one other thing in there, because this has been, a lot of people have been talking about this, Will. I'm sure you get this question, but yeah. I think what's in vogue right now, too, and you go to a supplement container, and I don't support this brand. I just bought this because it's a new form of casein that I was trying. I love casein protein, but
yeah.
Half these goddamn jugs aren't even full.
Yeah.
They're literally like right here.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of settling.
Failing to weigh them, but.
Yeah, I mean they're filled on weight.
4 pounds.
Yeah, I mean they're filled on weight, and obviously they settle and stuff. So I don't want to be too hard on them. I mean, again, is there some like stuffing socks in your pants? Is there some misadvertising going on there? Maybe. I mean, again, who knows? For the most part, though, they do. I mean, obviously they do it on weight, and the stuff does settle. So I'm sure they could fit more into smaller cans, but I don't want to be too hard from that perspective.
Yeah, you guys mentioned, both of you, and I think you're throwing a few things that the audience may not be aware of. What's amino spiking?
Well, Jay, what's amino spiking?
So amino spiking is, and Will could probably explain it better than I am, but essentially putting in false proteins into the protein content of the container. So, for example, if it says it's 25 grams of protein per scoop, they're using like less quality, not real protein. It's essentially like a derivative of protein, but
they're throwing in. What they do is they use cheap amino acids, so they get
cheap
nitrogen.
Amino acids.
Yeah. So what they'll do is use a really cheap amino acid. So what you'll get when you test it is you'll get the nitrogen content, and that's usually how they test for protein content. So they get the nitrogen, and basically what they did is they just put a lot of some cheap ass amino acid. Save themselves some money. So
so real quick, let me just stop everybody. We've got about between 7 and 10 people, it looks like, that are active in the audience. I just set the Q&A, so if you guys want to ask questions for Will, please do so on the right side. Continue, Will.
Hey, Will.
See, this is more tech I don't know. So the questions actually pop up in the screen?
No.
They'll show over on the right.
Yep. That's cool. All right.
Bill, talking about comparisons of companies and formulations, etc., I've been checking out, obviously, different websites like consumerlabs.org that actually do some testing. I've been reading good things about them. Sometimes I read some bad reviews on the fact that maybe some of the products I review, they get some money from those companies. What websites out there besides yours, I guess you do some reviews in your website on, can we trust? I mean, what websites out there compare products and we can actually trust what they're concluding from the analysis?
That's an excellent question, and I don't have a great answer. And honestly, the only real reason for that not having a great answer is I just don't really spend that much time reading other people's websites or looking at what the competition. I mean, as far as specifically just analyzing supplements, it's really I mean, and I'm not giving a great answer here, unfortunately, but I just don't spend a lot of time looking at other websites in terms of how they're analyzing stuff. Whether they're doing a good job or not. I mean, it's somewhat hit or miss. I mean, you've got a lot of really good nutrition writers out there, of course. I mean, who do an excellent job, like Alan Aragon and Lyle McDonald and stuff. I mean, you can get some great information, more similar to the type of stuff I do. But as far as like what you're sort of saying, more in that testing, analyzing, discussing supplements, I unfortunately I don't have a great answer. I'm sure they exist. I just I'm usually like too busy on Facebook and my own websites and stuff to You know, it's the same with YouTube. People say, you know, you see what so-and-so said on YouTube, and I'm like, no, I didn't. I only care about, I don't want to see what the competition's doing. I don't really care. I'm just going to sound arrogant, but I don't really care what they have to say, you know, on a matter. I mean, I've got my opinions and my own science, and so I just don't, you know.
Yeah, I really I really respect the guys from Examine.com for.
Yeah, right. Examine. Right there you go. Yeah, I wish I should have. There you go. Saul, that's a exactly. Good when you brought up. I should have brought it. Yeah, Examine does a good job. ConsumerLabs.com.org actually seems good. I mean, they have tables that compare products. And yeah, I think Consumer Labs does a good job. But as you said, one of the big criticisms is that, you know, companies have to pay a fee, a pretty hefty fee, you know, to be shown, and you know, they made a pretty good racket out of that. So I can totally see a company, you know, maybe feeling there's some bias going on against it. But yeah, again, Examine.com. As always, I mean, I'm going to have my own take on maybe sometimes my take is not the same as Examine's on a certain product, but I think they generally do a good job on, you know, examining stuff and writing and sticking to the science and stuff. Because remember, sometimes the conclusion of science is still interpretive. You know, there's still a subjective human. I can look at a study and say, well, you know, I don't think this study is really that compelling due to X, Y, Z.
Or it's done in rats.
Yeah, or done in rats, exactly. I mean, there's a lot of rats, the dosage, how many people were in it, how long did it run. So there's going to be some, you know, some differential to what I conclude. I Examine, I think sometimes maybe they're a little, on some things, maybe a little too positive. I mean, I'll pan something that they might actually can sort of leave a little more positive, but I don't think that's, you know, intentional. I really don't. I think they you know, generally hired good people. And actually, Examine was putting out, I don't know if you saw it, but they were putting out a small science newsletter.
Yeah.
That was I really liked that. I thought that was really well done. I wrote about that on the Brink Zone. I thought they did really a top job on that.
Yeah, I follow them. I follow you, obviously, and I follow Jerry Brainham.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Jerry's always got good info too, right? So I mean, I don't want to leave people out. I just not, you know, my mind doesn't jump to. But yeah, Jerry's been around, you know, writing forever, and he's and again, Jerry and I have had our go-arounds on a few things, and that we might look at the same science and just come to some slightly, you know, different conclusions. He may be more down on a thing and I'm up on it, or vice versa. But I think within that crew of people, Jerry and Alan Argon and stuff, you know, you get some real good. And Examine, at least with that core group, you'll be able to make your own decision, pulling from, you know, from those people for sure. You're not going to see total opposite conclusions, you know.
Yeah.
Coming from any of us, we might have our slightly different take or whatever.
Yeah.
You know.
Do we want to jump into whey protein?
Yeah. Well, whey is one of my babies. You know.
How, you know? Tell us about whey protein, the data behind it. I'm going to add my own because I actually was part of a study that we did for HIV wasting that came up with really amazing results when it comes to immune function. We were looking for actually lean body mass increases, whether or not whey protein actually increased lean body mass. These were guys that were not working out. They had HIV, obviously. But we found no differences between a placebo-controlled study. But we found a difference in their CD4 cells, which are the immune cells.
Right.
Increased. So that was pretty amazing because we were not looking for that. But go ahead and tell us, because you're the whey guy, basically.
Yeah. Well, and you know, again, pre-internet, I was actually the first person to write.
Is there such a thing as pre-internet?
Yeah, well, I mean, when you talk to people about that, and we're not talking kids either. When you say pre-internet, these people are in their 30s and they still look at you like you're out of your mind. So that's how old I guess I'm getting.
Yeah, I am older.
But I mean, we're not talking like 18-year-old. We're talking 30-plus-year-old people here who go pre-internet. You know, but I was actually the first guy to write like the long science-based articles on whey in the magazines, and that kind of came about as I was spending another day in the medical library, because then remember there was no internet to go look up studies. I used to spend days in the Harvard and BU medical libraries looking up studies, and I came across a study on whey, and I ended up communicating with Dr. Bunos. Now, Dr. Bunos was the whey guy. He truly was the whey guy. He was the one that did all these studies in animals and people on the immune benefits. So again, similar to creatine for me, I got into whey more interested in its immune benefits and anti-cancer benefits than I really did as a protein replacement. And similar to creatine, I think whey has more benefits as a health supplement, which I would use whether I worked out or not, than it does even as a a sports nutrition product. I would take whey no matter what. So I started looking. Then I started to communicate, like say, with the Dr. Bunos, who really was the guy who had done all the studies that we depend on today. When we talk about whey as having immune benefit, anti-cancer benefit, those were all done by Dr. Bunos. He out of Canada. He was a great guy. He passed away not that long ago. But the immune benefit, the CD4 benefit, is of course the effect on glutathione. And
Right.
Dr. Bunos was the one who discovered the effects of whey on glutathione, and he was the one who discovered that not all whey had that effect, that the way they produced whey back in those times was under high heat and stuff, and he found out that only whey made a certain way under lower temperatures had that effect. And he found completely by mistake, basically a truckload of whey was coming to his lab, and it broke down in the heat and sat there for a couple of days. And then when it got to the lab, it didn't work. And this was he couldn't figure out what the problem was. And so this tipped him off that there was a heat factor, that some of the sensitive heat liable proteins in whey were responsible for this. And that's what set him off on that journey of testing all these different ways as to how they worked and how they needed to be produced and which subfractions had all. Whey is really interesting stuff. It's very complicated stuff. It's a very complicated protein. Unlike creatine, which is pretty straightforward, you can kind of go down the rabbit hole with whey with all the technicalities. But the effects on whey through its immune system, CD4, is basically through its effects on glutathione, and glutathione is the major water-soluble antioxidant, and it's also fuel that your CD4 cells, your killer T lymphocytes stuff, live on. They basically use that as fuel. I know Dr. Bunos also did a study on HIV and CD4 cells, and I don't know if that's the same study you're referring to, or was that a different study?
Ours was funded by the U.S. government, by the National Institute of Health, placebo controlled. So it was very strict. I was part of the research team, and as I said, that was an amazing. However, these guys were not working out, so we saw no differences between placebo.
Yeah, that makes sense. No, again, that makes sense. I mean, Dr. Bunos's, patients also were not working out, but they did see big improvements in T cells, CD4 and T cells, and of course glutathione.
Yeah, and my issue with whey and many of the guys I work with is the gut issues. I get bloated, I have diarrhea, I have gas, even, I've tried different products, and usually I cannot tolerate more than maximum 15 grams if I'm lucky.
Right.
What do you, and even the lactose-free wheys, problems. What do you tell guys that have GI issues with whey?
Well, I guess at first I just tried to, as you said, obviously you look for a good isolate, which like CFM by Glanbia. Again, I've done some work for Glanbia.
Very slowly say that so everybody can.
Glanbia Nutritionals is a big dairy company that makes really some of the highest grade whey concentrates and isolates around, and a lot of companies use them or mix their stuff. But sometimes, some of those protein powders out there have things that bother my stomach too, like thickening agents. Some of those guar gums and carrageenan and stuff. I try to tell them to find, straight up whey if they can, which you can either buy, sometimes in bulk. The Life Extension whey, for example, is just CFM, Glanbia isolate, a little stevia, and some vanilla extract, and that's it. That stuff doesn't seem to bother people's stomachs. One of the tricks also maybe is to mix it in a good sized bottle of water, large, and to sip at it instead of getting that big 20, 30 grams. So you basically, by the end of the day, you've gotten 20, 40, 50, whatever you're trying to get, for whey into your system, and just kind of. And again, if it's got those thickening agents in it, it doesn't. I don't like that cake batter stuff like the MRPs. Personally, that bothers my stomach. That bloats me, gives me gas. The straight up whey isolate, like the CFM stuff with no thickening agents, it's very thin. It's just watery. And I'm drinking it right now, actually. It's very thin. It doesn't, personally, I've got pretty sensitive stomach too. So.
And the one you use from Life Extension?
Yeah, that's what I use. You can get CFM whey from Glanbia and other sources. There's a few. I know there's a few online bulk places that sell it.
I've
Well,
used
I mean, I get all my protein powder from True Nutrition, you know,
Right, I think they've got it. They probably have
from
glandular.
Dante's. I mean, he sells
Yeah.
like 90% of it to everybody. So
Yeah, so I bet he's got CFN Glambia, which I think, again, due to their patented process, they use these very high-tech ceramic filters. They're patented to them only to make their isolate.
right.
I think there could be some more studies to compare one versus the other, but again, nobody listens to me.
I like how light Isopure is, but you told me that maybe that's not the best option.
Well, the problem with the problem with Isopure is it's ion exchange.
Right.
And the problem with ion exchange is that it loses a lot of the beneficial subfractions in whey, such as lactoferrin, which of course is awesome stuff. I wrote some great articles on lactoferrin, but it loses some of the key bioactive fractions. It's lost, and what it does is it increases the beta lac content, and it loses some of the alpha lac and the lactoferrin stuff. So from a protein standpoint, like if you're just looking for protein replacement, it's fine. It's a good protein source. I mean, again, it's just sort of what you're looking. If it's more of a post-workout, yeah.
Or immune support, it's not then.
I would say, yeah. If Bunos's studies and all that, are what are correct, then yeah, it's not going to be the best for immune support, because you are losing, you are filtering out some of the important subfractions, lactoferrin and a few others, and reducing the BSA content. So yeah, again, we need more. I'm going to say we need more data. I'd like to see more studies done, and I really try to encourage, companies like Gladly and that make Isopure, which is Davisco, I believe. If not, sorry, Davisco. But anyway, these big dairy companies, I really think they need to reproduce some of Bunos's research, even just in animals. I think it's money well spent, and obviously the only reason the whey industry exists is because of some of that early research he did, and it can only help. But there hasn't really been a lot of follow-up, to reproduce some of this stuff.
Yeah. And Jay said he likes casein. Can you compare casein versus whey?
Well, casein, milk, basically cow's milk is casein and whey and water, basically, your two main proteins, and whey is about 15%, and the rest of the protein content is casein. And whey is considered a quote-unquote fast protein. It's very soluble. It mixes in water easily. It digests really quick. Casein is the opposite in that it is a slow protein. It clumps together and makes these little micelles, so it digests slower. I think, I'm not a casein, again, I think is kind of a protein that makes sense depending on what you're doing.
Right.
Like you're not going to be eating for a long time.
If you do intermittent fasting, great protein.
Yeah. So if you're dieting, or you're not going to be eating for a long time, just like cottage cheese. Cottage cheese is a perfect example. All those little clumped up protein, it's big protein molecules. But I like casein for times. But if you're going to be eating regularly, you're going to be getting your number of meals per day. I'm not a fan. Again, right. If you're going to be on low calories, it does appear to be more anti-catabolic than whey is, but it doesn't appear really to have. It doesn't have the same immune support. It certainly doesn't have the only protein ever studied to do what it does is whey, as far as the anti-cancer benefits and the immune benefits. Dr. Bunos.
I use it actually exactly as you said. I use it at night when I'm doing intermittent fasting on my non-training days.
Right.
I'll take it as my last meal. Just for all the exact reasons you said.
Oh, there you go. So So you've got a long, steady protein source that's in your system for hours and hours, and yeah. So it's kind of a special purpose protein. I think if you use it in the right spots, I tend to like to eat cottage cheese if I'm looking for my casein, a blast. If I'm not going to be eating for a while, before I go to bed, I'll have a few. Sure. But that's just because I'm cheep.
So Nelson, let me. We got like 6 minutes, 7 minutes if we have questions. I wanted to just jump in. I think maybe spend a couple minutes on this last topic, if this is in fact the last topic. But and Will, you and I were speaking in Florida last week at SOAR, and then also earlier this week about the whole YouTube sensation and all these guys and whatnot. And I think this is Nelson's question, so I'm kind of stealing his thunder, but I think it's a good point to segue here. And obviously Nelson and I are biased. We've written, books on testosterone, but, so many men, okay, are still being sucked into, the YouTube barkers, the stuff they see on the internet whenever they go on the Huffington Post or whatever, and, they got their clickbait ads showing up there about boosting their testosterone by, buying this wonder supplement. I could go on and on, Nugenics, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
What is the fat, end-all, be-all truth about test booster supplements, in your opinion?
To sum it up, I think they're a big fat waste of fucking money. That's what I think. That would be the end-all, be-all. That my scientific opinion is, basically, a new Wonder Tea booster will come out. It'll sell like crazy. Then it'll actually finally get tested, aspartic acid, whatever, and it will fall flat on its face. So time and time again, you'll have it'll come from some magical herb from the Andes, used for thousands of years by fucking hunter-gatherers. It'll make it to the market, blah, 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 and then when somebody formally tests it, it falls on its face every single time.
Or it's got Viagra.
Yeah, well, that too. So, to date, I'm not going to say never, but I mean, to date, I do have an article on my site that sort of summarizes the category on test boosters and why I think, a lot of what happens, of course, is placebo effect. I mean, expectation bias. Again, people hate to think they could possibly be, placebo-driven, but they are. I just don't, a lot of times, of course, we all know that testosterone levels go up and down. I mean, there's just a lot of funny stuff with testosterone levels, too. I mean, the sound of exotic cars raises testosterone, they've shown. In fact, they even narrow it down to certain types of cars. Pictures of naked girls raises testosterone. So even expectation bias. So, to my basic summary, though, every time I see a big Wonder Tea booster, the data behind them is almost invariably either, non-existent, or is always published in the Journal of Sexology, and that's a real journal, by the way. I'm not making that up.
Right.
It's published in the Journal of Sexology out of Romania, so on and so forth. And so, again, every time you look into it, it just always falls on its face when you give it a good, deep look. Now, with one caveat to that, there are some things that may work a little bit on libido and stuff that are working through non-androgenic mechanisms.
Right.
For example, horny goatweed does actually appear to work as a phosphodiesterase inhibitor, i.e. that's how Viagra works.
Right.
And so there may actually be a little something to that one, but it's not doing it through testosterone, apparently, because again, it's been tested, and it falls on its face. I think it was actually Dr. Antonio tested one of them. I'm trying to remember which testosterone booster it was, but not only did their testosterone not go up, their leg press numbers went down. Why, I don't know, but he thought it was actually kind of, he didn't know either. He couldn't figure out why that happened, but in fact, it went down.
It's amazing how many men, like successful executive level, just guys that are doing really well, believe that Tomcat Ali is going to replace their testosterone.
Yeah, expectation bias, it won't go away. Men, we're all, subject to what we're subject to, and men just want something to work like that so bad, whether it's the zinc. Right. And again, if you're deficient in zinc, absolutely, zinc is good stuff. But I mean, it's only gonna fix off a deficiency. But most of the guys I see with low testosterone, I actually knew a guy, and I want him to write his story, that he had some of the lowest testosterone I've ever seen. Anorexic girl levels of testosterone, and he kept looking for the magic elixir. And he's a scientist. He's not a dumb guy. And basically, he was a mess. His diet sucked. He was stressed out all the time. He worked a ton. I found out he even had a mild eating disorder. Yada yada yada. He overtrained like a motherfucker.
Right.
Had a low-fat diet. And he was doing all the things. And this guy actually went, when he finally got his act all together, he was in the 700s. For testosterone, which is pretty, you don't see that too often.
Sure.
And, he said, every time you were the only one I would come to and say, Will, what do I need to do? And you would tell me to stop overtraining, get some fat in my diet, go see a therapist to get my stress levels down, learn to meditate, or whatever it was, and that is for most guys, if they are suppressed, for some way that they can, something they can do to deal with it. If those things don't work, then by all means, then by all means, and there is just a natural aging process of which your testosterone goes down. I mean, the other thing a lot of guys, as you know, don't want to admit to is that you can also do everything right and still see your testosterone levels go in
Yes.
the toilet? You know, I mean, that's just genetics or environment, or you know, you sucked on the left boob versus the right when you were a kid and got the wrong stuff. I don't know, but that's also a thing. I know guys that are a little bit in denial there.
Right.
You know, and so I personally, I think, you know, testosterone obviously should be a normal test done with all your other hormones every year or whenever you get your, you know, physical. But I think at least every guy after 40 should do it yearly,
Right.
regardless of how he feels. The guy that I always get well, I feel okay. Well, then that's great. Then if you feel okay and it comes back high, well, now you've got a baseline to work with. And
Exactly.
so let's say in a couple of years from now you're not feeling okay. Well, we have something to compare it to. So it doesn't matter what it comes back as. You know, it's irrelevant to how you're feeling. It's just at a certain age, you know, normally it will start to trail off. And so, you know, get that baseline number. I put 40 as kind of the magic number, but, you know, that's not really that seems to be statistically where it tends to start to trail off. But you can do it earlier or later.
Yeah, I mean, Nelson and I have written obviously profusely, prolifically about it. I mean, until the tests are standard patient of care model stuff, you know, you go to Nelson's company, okay, guys, discountedlabs.com, and you get the male hormone profile, and you take ownership of your health, okay? Because nobody's going to take ownership for your health but you. It's as simple as that. You know, we're right up at 5 o'clock. We've got, I think, between 8 and 11 viewers right now actively watching. Before we sign off, I'll just ask those guys if they want to ask a question real quick. They should see it on their screen on the right-hand side. Please ask it now. Otherwise, final thoughts from Nelson first, and then Will.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, everybody, for watching today's webinar. We have basically one every 3 weeks or so, different speakers. So we'll be letting you guys know on Facebook. I have a testosterone replacement discussion group on Facebook. Jay has a TRT mastermind group. I also post on excelmail.com. It's my website where guys can ask questions there. So look for the next webinar. So thank you so much. I really want to thank Will Brink. We've been after him for a while. He has, as I said, we can speak for hours. Maybe we'll bring it back.
I could definitely follow up on another one. I could easily see. There's plenty of stuff we could talk about, and maybe get into some fun stuff like some old school discussions.
Yeah. I mean, Will, thank you so much for coming on, dude. You were a fountain of knowledge. You know, between you and Jerry, I don't know. I think you kind of knocked Jerry back a little bit. The only thing I would say is we definitely want you to come back. I mean, there's so much more stuff we can talk about. And again, and guys, for everybody, you know, I'll post all the different links, but please, you know, check out Will's site. It's brinkzone.com, BRINK. Will is again just an absolute resource. I mean, there's so much information on his site. He's got videos, all kinds of written content, and there's just a lot of stuff. And you know, like I said, Will, final thoughts. Anything you want to plug?
You know, nothing I can think of. Check out my website. Like I say, I mean, I've got, you know, books and products and stuff. So I'm always happy to have people come check it out. I will say, try my bomb-proof coffee recipe and give me some feedback on that. I always want to hear. You know, if you're a coffee guy, you'll love the stuff. If not, you'll love it anyway. You know, nobody yet has anything negative to say about it. So I'm looking for feedback on that too.
I'll write a review soon.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure, Will. For sure. Both of us will. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop the broadcast. Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot. Guys, take care.